What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and, most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Guys, real quick before we begin, I want to quickly tell you about my new coaching program, Elite Property Foundations. It's officially launched as of the 1st of June, and it is now alive and kicking with members. If you are a novice property investor or you would like to be a property investor, this is the program for you. I guarantee it's going to take you from feeling nervous about what you're doing to being both highly knowledgeable and confident in your decisions. There's a load of features and benefits, so you should definitely check it out. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes below. That's all. I hope to see you inside. Now let's get on with the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And this week, even though I'm still in the middle of moving house, and it's some job, I can tell you, it's one of the reasons why today's podcast is a little bit delayed in going out. It's just there's so much work moving house. But no excuses. I have a guest for you to listen to this week. This week I've had a conversation with Miss Mary Conway. Now, Mary has just come straight from the speaking stage of my recent property investment event, and she has got over 27 years of experience in the Irish property investment market. She is a nurse by training, but in 2015 she transitioned over into full-time real estate investment agent, management. She does a lot of different things. She is, and she does all of that through her company, Janus Estates. And I'm going to put links and stuff in the show notes. She's also the chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association. And so those of you who listen to the Irish news stations like RTE and stuff, you'll probably recognize her voice as the spokesperson, and she's done a lot of media appearances on RTE and things like that. So in this episode, we're going to be jumping into her background, and we've also going to be talking about her rapid rise as an investor. She went from 0 to 16 properties over the space of about 10 years. And we're going to talk about her transition to full-time real estate agent and how she went about doing that. We're also going to cover her outlook on the market and some of the many, many challenges that are facing property investors in the Irish market at the moment. And oh yes, I also should mention, she is also a senior move management specialist. And that is, for those of you not aware, it's for somebody who helps older people in their downsizing from, a big, large home into something much, much smaller. If my experience here moving house is anything to go by, it is stressful and it's a lot of work. And so having somebody to manage that I think it's probably a good market to be in. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So guys, without further ado, my conversation with Mary Conway. Mary Conway, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Gavin. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome, Mary, and you are guest number 2 to be physically in my office here, Owen Riley being the first one. So it's great to have you here in person, and we're going to have a great conversation today about Irish property in particular. And that is because you're an Irish agent and you're based here in Dublin, like myself. And so we're going to have a good old conversation on that. For anyone who is listening in from abroad, and as I've been looking at my sort of statistics coming in on the podcast, we have people listening in from Saudi Arabia, we have people listening in from Slovenia, we have people listening in all over the world now. So for those people who might not have heard who Mary Conway, who you are, will you just give us a kind of a brief description of what it is you do?
Well, I grew up on a farm in Sligo, and I came to Dublin at 18 to train as a nurse. I wanted to be a vet, but I didn't get my points to go to college. So I went kicking and screaming into nursing, and I did that for very many years. I've worked all over the world. I've worked in Saudi Arabia, I've worked in the UK, and worked in almost every hospital in Dublin. and I bought my first investment property about 27 years ago, and it was a 3-bed terraced house in Drumcondra, and I had a deposit from a life assurance policy that I cashed in, and we paid the deposit. We were about to close the sale and we realised we didn't have any money for furniture. So would we go ahead with it, or would we pull out of the deal? And I think the house was around 80,000 at the time, 80 or 80, and that was pounds. Not sure if it was 80,000 or 88,000, but it was a lot of money. So we put an ad, we ran a dummy ad in the evening papers as it was at that stage. It was pre-online marketing, and we got a call from a lady to say she was interested in renting the house. And to cut a long story short, it turned out she didn't have any furniture and she needed somewhere to store the furniture. So we said, look, would you take the house unfurnished? And she did, and our property journey started there. So within another year, I bought a second house. This one was in Botanic Avenue in Drumcondra, and we catered mainly to the student market around St. Pat's, around DCU, and I did that for many years.
Can I just ask, so were you practicing as a nurse whilst you were doing this?
Yes, no, I had taken some time out to have my children. I have 3 children who are now 30, 28 and 24, and I was out of work with an injury. I had a succession of 3 accidents, and I couldn't really work as a nurse, so I took some time off.
Okay.
So this is what I did, and then I went back to nursing in 2003.
Is that related to the life policy that you said that you were cashing in?
No.
Anyway.
No.
Okay, so listen, sorry, I interrupted your flow there, but you bought 2 properties in quick succession.
Yeah.
And so you're just whetting your appetite in the property journey, but you're
and
starting
I remember
to like
somebody saying at the time, buying the first one is the hardest. After that, it gets easy, and it did get quite easy. We're talking about, the boom times, the noughties, 1996, 97, 98, and I bought my last investment property in 2008.
Ooh,
and bought 2
timing.
then, which
Great
was
timing.
bad timing. So at one stage I had 16 investment properties. I had 90 tenants from 35 different countries.
Wow.
And I was still working full-time as a nurse, so that became a bit of a challenge.
Well, this is going to be interesting because there's a lot of people that are listening in that, they're thinking about going down the road of investing, or they are an investor, and they're kind of like, oh, you can't do too many properties. But you had 16. I mean, when did you chuck in the job as a nurse and become kind of full time?
In 2015, actually.
And you had already had 16 properties and you were nursing at the same time.
Now, my husband at the time, he had finished his job in 2004, so he was working full-time in property.
Okay.
And things were different then to how they are now. The Residential Tenancies Board was set up in 2008, so the landscape very much changed for landlords from that point. And my word of advice to anybody that's getting into property, particularly if they have a busy day job, is don't try and do it yourself. Get an agent, spend the bit of money it takes. It's not that much every month, and get somebody to manage your properties. They know the legislation, they know the changes. Yeah. It's a different landscape to what it was then.
The analogy that I can use in that regard is like, I'm an architect by training, but I stopped practicing as an architect about, 30 years ago nearly now. Around about the time that I qualified was 97. So do the maths, it's like 25 years ago or something. But I only practiced for about 2 or 3 years before I realized that knowing all these regulations and the rules and stuff, and like how many millimeters of a step should be in a door opening for fire and all that, that's just the minutiae that I'm not interested in. I'm looking at the deal. So you hire in the specialist to look after that stuff, because it's their job to know those regulations. And that's what you're saying, is that...
Yeah, and I'm not just saying that because I'm an agent. I've just seen so many mistakes that landlords have made in complete innocence.
Yeah. Like
when you see the figures coming out, for example, from Threshold, and they say about all the illegal eviction notices that have been issued and that they've been done incorrectly, it makes it sound as if all landlords are up to mischief. But in all honesty, it's probably just a genuine mistake.
A lack of knowledge.
It's a lack of knowledge, and people are afraid to go and ask for help a lot of the time.
Yeah. And you mentioned something, you came and you spoke at my event there last week, and you were talking about somebody, and you were saying it was something like a 15,000 fine that they got hit with, and that they had to absorb that, but it was their mistake that they had done something that they shouldn't have. And this is the kind of thing that we're talking about, is that you're a landlord, you think you're doing, you're a reasonable person, you're renting to a person, but that person might just realise that this is actually technically against the law and therefore you can't do it. Next minute you've found yourself on the wrong side of the RTB.
Absolutely, and the legislation has changed so many times. Like even on Friday, I went to register some tenancies, and I see there's I don't know if you're familiar with the page. Everything is online now, and you have to do an annual registration. And there's a whole new yellow box down along the side with end tenancy. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, where did this come out? It wasn't here last week. And I still don't know. I intend to find out, but I don't know. So if I clicked into one of those, would I automatically terminate a tenancy? I don't know. It's all way too technical.
Yeah, it sounds like they need to educate people, like the people that are using it, better.
Well, I think what they need to do is they need to look at the legislation. 2004 is a long time ago. There's been, I think, 54 modifications in that time. I know some of them were forced with COVID and things like that, but it's just way too complicated. I know as a nurse, if we were writing any educational materials for patients with regards to treatments or whatever, you're supposed to have it, I think, at a reading age of 9. There's a national literacy guidance, but this is definitely not at an age of 9.
Well, the thing is like landlords and tenants, like it's a basic right, and to be able to go out and rent out your house because you don't feel like selling it or something like that. Like say you want to keep a house in the family because it was belonged to your parents or something like that, and you decide that I don't want to sell it, but I'm not living in it, so I'll rent it out. And you go and you do that, and you shouldn't have to go and hire a whole team of people in order to kind of do that, you know what I mean? But you're saying that there are so many changes on such a regular basis that just staying on top of the regulations is proving to be really difficult.
And this is particularly difficult for older people. I have a lady who rang me today. She has multiple properties. She's in her 80s, and she rang me in a panic because she can't use the online system. And she said, I think my tenancies need to be paid for. Now, I had it done from last week because it's all set up anyway. But like, she is losing sleep at night over this. She's never done anything wrong. But the stress it's causing her, it's just crazy.
Well, anyway, we won't get into a RTB bashing session just yet.
No, I don't think. I think the RTB are probably doing their best. They are constrained with the legislation, and they're understaffed, and they need some help.
Yeah. Well, look, let's continue with your story. You went through, so you were growing quite quickly. Up to 16 properties is quite. And were these all? Were you able to do this through leveraging you're obviously the debt and things like that is an issue. You buy a property, it's increasing in value, you're able to create that little bit of equity, you take the equity out, buy the next property, and you were just kind of going on and on and on like this.
Yeah, they were being cross-secured, so in hindsight it wasn't the best move, and we did try and segregate them out, and that's another whole story. But yeah, my advice to anybody starting out is get the right advice from the beginning. We thought we knew it all. We didn't have a tax advisor, and we've gone down the wrong way in so many ways, and it's challenging. Mistakes
are easy to make when you don't have anyone kind of in your corner that's kind of pointing you in the right direction. That's one of the reasons that I started the podcast, is because my story of the ups and downs of my career and stuff like that, I do that mainly because I think a lot of that was unforced errors that just were from a lack of understanding. And if I share my story, then maybe other people out there, they'll hear that and they'll kind of go, geez, I didn't realize that that's something that can happen. And I was very reckless when I was 30 years of age. What's the big deal? I borrow another $1 million. Like, what's the worst that can happen? But this stuff lasts for years. Like, I was a decade trying to clear myself out of the difficulties that I got into. And I know you've had some difficulties in your past with the debt and things like that as well.
Yeah, I've had my challenges. My marriage broke down, the properties were jointly owned, and then that became difficult to manage as well. And the bank won't take, it's not as if you can say, you take this one and I'll take this one, because joint names are on them and the bank won't take a name off them. So that led to challenges as well. So as a result, I've disposed of some of them and still disposing.
Yeah. Now, so tell us, in terms of your career as a nurse, you decided to call an end to that, and you decided that let's roll up the sleeves and get involved in the actual property business. Tell us about your decision to do that, because it sounds like it's an awful lot of work. So explain your rationale.
I suppose it was the summer of 2014. I was just working incredibly hard. We had challenges from the banks, we had receivers, there was all kinds of things going on, and I was trying to work I think it was probably about a 45-hour week in the hospital. I was a bowel cancer specialist, so it was fairly intense stuff. And I had 3 young adults that were starting in college. And just one day I just thought, I have enough. I just can't deal with calls from tenants and work and giving 50% to everything. I need to give 100% to something. So I decided I would go back and study for my licence and see could I take other people's properties on and work from there.
Interesting, yeah. And is it difficult to get a PSRA licence?
Well, I went back to Tala at the time, and it was every Saturday for 2 years, and it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. It was the IPOA course. I made some lifelong friends that I would talk to on a regular basis. They'll bounce things off me about letting. I'll bounce things off them about sales or management, and I really enjoyed my 2 years. Halfway through, I saw an article in the New York Times about senior move management and working with older people who are downsizing. And I thought this would be a really nice thing to do with my background in nursing and all the rest. So I went and I joined the National Association of Senior Move Managers in the States and did some training with them. So far, the work hasn't really materialised. I've worked with a few clients, but not as many as I would like, because number one, Irish people want their front door and their back door and their house in between and their back garden. They're more reluctant to downsize. A lot of cases, people have rang me and they're in their 80s, and I feel at this stage it's probably too old, for want of a better word, to move. I would suggest that people would move in their late 50s, early 60s, where they can become part of a community and join a community and have the energy to do the move. You've just moved house in the last week. And
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, yeah. And you're fit and able-bodied, and you've moved to somewhere you want to go. But in a lot of cases, if you have the big house and you're trying to find something, you can't actually find somewhere to downsize.
Well, you know, I'm actually in the process of doing this for my mum, and so she's in the house that I grew up in, and it's a big kind of 5-bedroom house that with land around it and stuff like that. Way too big for her, but she's emotionally attached to the area. She has loads of friends that live on the same road and all this, and so the big challenge for her is she does not want to move into an apartment. She's had, a nice garden where you can walk out your back door. She likes wildlife and stuff, so she feeds the birds and all this. And trying to find a house, and the big concern for her is not so much, downsizing is easy, but downsizing into a bungalow is what she wants, because she's thinking about going up and down stairs as you get older. Like, she doesn't want to be, housebound or having to get nurses and things like that. So she's thinking ahead, and the problem is nowadays you just don't build bungalows anymore because they're not density, the density guidelines don't work for a city, and so she's forced to look for existing bungalows that are on the market, and we are in fact bidding on one at the moment. But the funny thing is that you don't realize that this is a problem until you're actually in it yourself. And I know there's an awful lot of people out there that are, the age profile of the Irish population, that this is something that's going to face, like, most of the population, like the majority are going to start to feel that over the next 20 years. So senior move is actually probably you're way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem. I'm too far ahead.
Well, you can, what a pioneer is what we call that, is when, the person that trailblazes, and you're out there and you're crossing across America into the Wild West, and like you have to fight the Indians and all that. You're paving the path for the people that will follow.
You see, we don't really have intra-generational housing.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if it was a case of, say, you have a duplex, that the downstairs would be
for an older person,
and upstairs is for a family or whatever. We're still fixated on the 3-bed semis in suburbia, whereas we need a lot more age-friendly housing. And some of the associated housing bodies, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Clon.
Yeah.
They're the over 55s of Clúid. They're doing amazing work. I did a fabulous job with one gentleman, and he literally came on a Friday evening with his 2 suitcases of stuff. We had everything done. His blinds were hanging. He didn't want a cooker. I insisted he had to have a cooker. I'm still waiting to be asked out for dinner. He told me he was going to cook me a leg of lamb one of the days. But, he's so happy. He's 60. He's in his forever home. He has everything he wants around him.
Nice.
He's on the ground floor.
And that's the thing. And so, interesting. So this is a service that you can provide.
Yes. And the biggest challenge for a lot of people is coping with possessions.
Yeah, I can tell you all about that right now.
So, have you taken your stuff out of the house, or is there still some of your stuff in your mother's family home?
I'm pretty kind of, sort of...
But I'm sure there's a box there now with your medals or your certificates or whatever.
There's probably some stuff, all right, yeah. But no, but I can tell you, when I made my first move, when I moved to Spain, and I had to clear out my big house, I actually got a skip in, and I filled that skip with junk that was up sitting in the attic for years. And it's one of those things that you just accumulate stuff. And now moving from the house, I've been living in rented accommodation pending moving into this new house that we've just finished. And it's just unbelievable, the amount of stuff and clutter and stuff like that. I mean, this lady from Japan, Mary Conway or something like that. I'm literally watching videos like how to clear.
No, what you need is the Swedish art of death cleansing.
Oh yeah,
there's a great book. Yeah, and
death cleansing.
Yeah, okay. So the Swedes all prepare for their death by getting rid of their possessions, and they just so that by the time they die,
they have nothing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And even the challenges I've had recently, the way now. You couldn't let a house if somebody had gone to a nursing home. So you can do that now. It hasn't really come in. I'm working with one lady, and the challenge she's having is going through her parents' possessions to rent the house, and it's taking forever. And I'm not pushing her. I just meet her and we talk about it. The last day I went in, she had her parents' wedding album on the table, and we were looking through that. But it's a huge emotional attachment, giving up a family home, and things that we would take for granted, like there's an old looking sofa that looks awful, but they bought it in 1970 and they had to save for it, or they had to buy it in HP, and it was like £500 back then. So we have to be very gentle with people and their memories. And
I think the memories is a big thing, because I have my house in Spain, and my kids, I brought them down there when they were like literally not even a year old yet, and then 3, and then 5. And you bring your kids down there and you have all of these formative memories of them, like learning to swim and all that kind of stuff. And that's very hard to give up, because it's really attached to that memory. And it's the very same. And so I know in my mum's case, there's the emotional side of the memories. There is the community side of all of the people that she knows in that area. There's the convenience of she's only a short walk down from the village. But there's the logistical thing. So she's in a 5-bedroom house, and she's trying to downsize now into what will be probably a 2 or 3 bedroom bungalow. Yeah. That's going to be like twice the amount, half the space for all of and she has accumulated quite a lot of junk, I would say. She won't throw things away. People, if they're collectors or magpies or whatever. They just.
But there's ways around that. Like you can't take, I've used the example before, you collect teapots, which are quite bulky. You can't take 27 teapots with you. So you decide on 2 and we make a photo book of the rest, or you put them into a coffee table, or you do something with them so they still have them.
Yeah, the memories are there. Yeah,
and it's, the memories are in here.
So that's what the senior move kind of teaches you, all of those kind of little tactics.
Yes, how to move and how to sort through the stuff, basically.
I would imagine there is actually a market for that. It's just a matter of getting yourself out there in front of your brand or people, make people aware of
I suppose the big thing is just people aren't finding somewhere to move to, so they're staying stuck. And the other thing is there's a very negative narrative from the government, because there was a study on this a few years ago, and the way it was kind of pitched was that they were turfing people out of their 5-bed home to let families in. We need
the word turfing out.
Yeah, that's
completely
kind of the way it came across. So we need to change the narrative, and we need people to do it when they're physically able to do it.
But also, there's the financial side. I mean, in my mum's case, it's a 5-bedroom house. It's pretty inefficient from a sustainability point of view. So I would say her bills and all that kind of stuff, and just the upkeep of an old house, and repairing windows and ceilings and stuff. All of that stuff is costing her a fortune, and she would much prefer to move into a smaller property. Finding it is the first thing, but it's the economic reasons for doing that.
And then the other, the whole stress over the garden and letting people in. I mean, we don't even think about things like that, because we can ring somebody and say, well, do you know Gavin, has he done your garden? Is he reliable? And the reliability piece for older people is huge. Like, who am I letting into my house?
Yeah, so true. So Mary, in terms of that's one sort of feather to your bow, but you're an agent and you manage properties for clients as well.
Yes, I do. I provide a letting service. My area of interest really is construction workers who are coming in from abroad, and I've been doing that off and on since 2003. Right. The biggest challenge at the moment is finding houses for people. The construction work is there, the workers are there, but there's nowhere to house them, and that's a big challenge. I also do a lot of smaller lettings, and there would be for somebody that maybe bought a home before they got married and they're holding on to it and they're moving into a new house or whatever. I would say a lot of my clients are busy mothers who have small children and want to rent out a property that they maybe inherited or something, and they just don't have the time to do it.
Yeah.
I also do sales, and I do a bit of block management.
Lots and lots of different things.
Yeah, every day is interesting.
Well, you give a great talk at my event on like Airbnb and HMO and the rules and stuff like that. A lot of people who are thinking of getting into a property investment, they're interested in this idea of creating a HMO. And obviously there's a lot to be learned about that. We won't get into all of that today. But what I wanted to also ask you is you recently, or not that recent at this stage, but you became the chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association, the IPOA. So tell us why you did that and about your role in there.
Well, the IPOA was founded 30 years ago this year. And I was a member I'm a member I think for about 25 years, and the meetings at the time used to be there was no property training, so the only property training that was out there were IPOA meetings, information. And I remember going to my first meeting in the Garda club in Harrington Street, if you remember it, and the room was just full of men. I think there was maybe 6 or 7 women out of about maybe 300 men.
Oh my God.
And I remember seeing them all at the time, and they were all quite old. I remember thinking, gosh, how is the property market going to sustain when these guys go? And in hindsight, I now know that a lot of them were pre-63 owners and had bed sits around the city. And one of the biggest things that has impacted on the property market in Dublin has been getting rid of the bed sits.
Right.
Because they were far from perfect, but they did work. So I've been a member for a long time. Then I joined the committee a few years ago. And then Stephen Faulkner, who was the founder and the chairperson from the beginning, he's now in his 70s, he won't mind me saying, and he was looking for somebody to succeed him. So I said I would do it for a year. So I'm now about 18 months into it, and there's no sign of anybody else taking over from me. But I've enjoyed it. It's been very interesting. Met lots of interesting people, been involved in lots of interesting discussions, done lots of media, some of it good, some of it awful.
Well, this is going to be one of the better experiences.
It's a lot easier than going out to RTE anyway and being savaged. But very challenging times for landlords.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, I'm going to be asking you about your outlook on the market and things like that. But before we get there, it's probably a silly question to ask the chairperson of it, but do you recommend joining the IPOA?
I do. They run a really good landlords training course. It's online. I think it's for about 6 weeks. And it's really good because they go into all the kind of nitty gritties of being a landlord. They go into the Residential Tenancies Act, how to write up a lease, how to vet tenants. Then there's always information webinars once a month on various topics. And it's a good source of information. The girls in the office are amazing. They have all the information and experience to deal with any queries that come in.
So you were saying earlier to hire an agent, but if you didn't hire an agent, you could actually go and do like that course, and
absolutely,
that would fill in a lot of the blanks.
Yeah,
interesting. And I mean, you mentioned there, you referred to RTE and all of these kind of things that are going on. The tell us what your view is on the market, because I'm a property investor. I talk about property investment. You're an investor. We don't want to talk the market down, but at the same time, there are some things that people need to be aware of, that it is not a walk in the park at the moment, that there's a lot of problems with the market. And I mean, we all know that there's a housing crisis, but and it's not going to be solved anytime soon. But that does not mean that this is like this, path paved with gold. It's a hard job becoming a landlord at the moment, because the taxation is working against you, pretty much everything. Tell us your view and I guess some of the stuff, the talking points that you bring up when you're with these other media.
I suppose the reasons that landlords are getting out of the market is, number one, over-regulation, and the other one is over-taxation. So if you are a PAYE worker and you have a rental property, it's more than likely you're paying in tax at around 52%. So it's a pretty hefty chunk of tax. And now that includes USC and PRSI, and they came in as a temporary measure a few years ago, but they've stuck. The same way as the rent pressure zones came in a few years ago, and they've stuck. So what has happened is inflation is now running at, what's it running at?
Well, it was 8%, yeah, that's probably somewhere around.
Yeah, and all costs have gone up, and then mortgage interest rates have gone up, but you can only go up with your rent at 2% yearly inside a rent pressure zone, and pretty much the whole country is within a rent pressure zone.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of sensational stuff going on in the media and reports, and you hear that rents are up again and rents are up again. But rents are up on new rents, new properties coming to the market. There's a lot of landlords who are seriously under-rented because they had good tenants and they held on to their tenants, didn't increase the rents, and then the rent pressure zones came in.
So you can't increase.
So you can only go up by 2% a year. But if you haven't gone up and you're on the difficulty then is, if they decide to sell the property, no other investor is going to buy it because they're also stuck at the 2% on the previous rent. So even if it was a case that the market was able to reset if a property was sold, but that's not the case at the moment. So that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to know how many landlords are getting out of the market. The RTB were set up to this annual registration, which is almost a year old, was supposed to capture the figures. But if your tenant had left without having to serve a notice of termination, they're not recorded anywhere on any census.
Right.
The Department of Housing came out last week with the census figures and said there's 330,000 households in the country renting, which is the same as the last time. So landlords aren't leaving the market, but they're not looking at the breakdown, that some of the split might be they've gone to housing bodies or whatever. So if you don't have accurate figures, it's very difficult to know. But anecdotally, I know from our members and from me getting calls to serve termination notices, they're quite high. There's
an increase in the number of termination notices, isn't there?
Yeah.
What is that figure?
Well, the RTB say 4,700 in the first few months of this year. Sherry Fitzgerald seem to think it's around 6,000.
Right.
They're the biggest agent in the country, so they would have a fairly good idea. But I don't know what the overall figure is.
But like, if we just go back even to basic principles, I mean, this all boils down to supply and demand. And you and I, before we started recording, we were sort of saying, what do you think is going to happen? Like, and really, you know, there's only so many properties in the market, and there's a growing population, and there's also inward migration. They've got people moving into the country. You also have what would be a huge building boom if we could get accommodation for those construction workers, which you were referring to there earlier. And so we have massive demand from either the population or the migration or the construction workers that would come in if they could find a place. And then the supply. I know from reading the figures that were released by, I think it was the central bank or whoever, that we built 33,000 units last year, but we need to be producing about 60,000 to reach just a basic equilibrium. And that's not for 1 year, that is continuously. Every single year, 60,000. So that's about double the output of the entire Irish construction sector at the moment. And if anyone knows, we're already maxed out. Like our site that we've just completed in Shankill, that is delayed. That's probably close to a year behind, and primarily because of labour shortages and stuff like that. We couldn't get people in. They were always, there would be guys coming in to do a job and then be gone halfway during the day to go off to some other job, and trying to kind of keep everyone happy. And so you have a massive shortage, and yet in order just to meet equilibrium, we need to double the size of it. So personally, my view is that it's an impossible fix. It cannot be fixed. And therefore, we're going to have a housing crisis for at least the next decade. And the only thing that could really prevent it is this, we've seen the interest rates going up. And if the banks start to pull their mortgage rates and stuff and just say, sorry, we're not giving you any money at all. I think what they're probably going to do is just reduce. You were talking anecdotally about one of your clients that had suddenly their bank adjusted downwards their mortgage approval, and they had to come up with sort of 30,000 or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of people probably facing that, and that's a problem that could be. But I don't see house builders saying, okay, we'll just drop the price by 30,000, because notwithstanding the outward sort of opinion of the builders are all making a fortune, the reality is that the cost of construction has shot up as well. And we also borrow money in order to build. And so our construction costs and our financing costs have all gone up. And so that is squeezing our profit levels. So we can't go and adjust the price downwards because we've already had a big chunk of it eaten away,
Yeah, there's just been too many things. There's been COVID, there's been the war in Ukraine. I don't think the government ever really saw that there was going to be inward migration on the scale that it's happening. And I'm not talking about Ukrainians or international protection
You're just talking about
people.
normal
I'm just
migration,
talking about people coming into work or people coming back from abroad. They were so used to everybody emigrating. And I remember, it's 2015 since I worked as a nurse, but on each ward in Beaumont, when you went up, there was a list of patients and their bed numbers. And what always struck me was you'd look at a list of 36 patients and there might be more than half of them weren't Gallagher or Conway or whatever. They were foreign names.
Yeah,
and the hospital was already at breaking point with our own Irish indigenous population without all the challenges of it, and that none of this was factored into planning, and that goes to hospitals, it goes to schools, it goes to housing,
but as a
it goes
nation,
right down.
we've always struggled with any kind of forward planning. If you remember, this is a sort of unrelated, but you remember when the M50 motorway opened and it was 2 lanes, and at the time they could have easily done 3 lanes, but they're we won't need that. And then sure enough, as soon as it's built, it's like, oh, better go and build the extra 3rd lane. And it's like that pretty much everywhere. Every piece of infrastructure or every major kind of planning thing is always underestimated.
I trained at Bagot Street, so you know the building there.
I know.
That closed in. Well, it moved to St James's in 1987, and parts of it were available afterwards. But I think
a methadone clinic.
There was lots of things, little things went on in it. But that's like a prime piece of real estate in the middle of Dublin, and it's sitting there and it's rotting. And my nurse's home was the Dillon Hotel.
Oh gosh, I remember.
So that's a very successful hotel. So that went out into private.
Yes.
Somebody bought it, but this is HSE, and it's just sitting there, and there must be a use of some sort for it.
Yeah, no, it's just waste. This is the problem, And then to make matters even worse, we've obviously got the Ukrainian crisis and the refugees piling into the country, and obviously after being through the 1847 kind of famine and all that, we're very open-minded about letting refugees in and things like that, and I think that's the way it should be. But you can sense nowadays when you go out there that there is a sort of resistance starting to build to this, and it's not because we don't like refugees, but because the amount of homes that are available for us is being dramatically reduced because of this influx. And so it's pretty difficult to, it's kind of a gnarly issue to try to deal with, because you can kind of see both sides in a sense. Like, you can't go and get a house if you're on a housing list, but a Ukrainian refugee that's just arrived into the country will be necessary, maybe placed quicker than that, So there are people starting to get cross about that.
What strikes me as well is when I'm doing sales, and particularly sales from, we'll say, 200 to 400,000, and you have a viewing, and there mightn't be one Irish person at it. And I think it's lovely to see what I call the new Irish. They've come in here to work, they've made their homes, they've been renting, and they now decide they want to settle down and buy a home here and live here and integrate into Irish society. And again, that was never factored into any figures.
Yeah.
Like, we do a census, but what do we do it for if we're not going to implement it?
And then, a funny one is I got into a taxi, and when I was, traveling abroad for all the years, every time I landed in Dublin, I'd get into a taxi, and it would be, if it was a foreign person driving the taxi, be like, how do you find living in Ireland? Like, where did you come from? When did you move here? And it would be kind of a typical question. And then recently I went on holiday. When I came back, I was being friendly, like sort of say, so where are you from? And he goes, I'm from, Darndale or whatever. And I was like, no, but where are you originally from? And he goes, I was born in Darndale. And I was suddenly, oh my God, I sound so white. I sound so prejudiced. But it was an innocent question, because I assumed. Yeah. And it's just, people are, it's the next generation of people that have moved here from the early 2000s. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So, in your view, the market, the direction of the market, I mean, it's kind of a breaking point, and it's not really, I don't really see an easy fix. I think that landlords will continue, property prices will continue to be under pressure because of the supply-demand tension. Affordability is obviously an issue, but for the people out there who are thinking, oh wow, it sounds like a great market to get in, you're here to basically say, think about it.
Yeah, think about it and see what structure you buy it in, and know your market and know your target market and where you're going to pitch it to. Like, my market was student rents around DCU and St. Pat's, and I used to buy kind of 3/4 bed houses, max out the rooms, get them into 6 bedrooms or whatever, and you get a group of friends and they come. But the whole college thing has now changed. A lot of them are only going into college maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so they're couch surfing. So there's there's just so many layers to the property market. I think HMO is a market that will always work, because there's always people coming in to work in the country that don't know anybody. And it's quite easy to move into a house with people you don't know, because you have your own room and your own space, and you know that you're going to be paying a fixed rate every month. So HMO market will always be a good one. I think we probably need to look at the regulations a bit more like the UK, and that will come in. So some of the guys I know are doing amazing HMOs, and they're basing them on the English model. So they're future-proofing them.
Yes.
I mean, there will always be a market for single-family homes. But again, I suppose know your target market. And yeah, there'll be challenges for times to come. I think more and more landlords will leave.
So give us some of the best advice over the years that you've received.
It's funny, because you sent me this in the text, and I said, what's the best advice I got? And actually the best advice I got that it stuck with me all my life was when I was doing a management course in the College of Surgeons, a nursing management course. And it was Dennis Cusack at the time who was in charge of the, I think he's been in charge of motor safety or road safety. He said, if something is causing you a challenge, think about it. Don't get stressed unless it's going to make a difference in 5 years' time. And we all stress over little things, but it's knowing what are the important things and to focus on those.
That's great advice, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people, they fuss about the stuff that's, you know, the ringing phone, like the urgent stuff.
Yeah.
But it's actually the stuff that's not necessarily niggling at you right now, but it's actually going to be still there. It's going to be a problem in 5 years.
And I'm just always impressed by human resilience in the face of challenges. As a nurse, I saw some awful things and some amazing things. I've qualified as a midwife. I've brought 50 babies into the world.
Wow.
But life is short, and you make the most of it, and to focus on the right things and not to lose focus on family, which is more important than money, because money will come and go, but you can't fall out with your family.
Well, on that, we shall end on that positive note. Mary, can I just, for anyone who is thinking about getting some advice or asking you to kind of give them some help with either the senior move or agency or anything like that, how should people look for you? What's the best place to find you?
Well, my company is Janus Estates, and Janus is the Roman god of new beginnings.
Very nice. So that's JANUS.
Yeah, and
Estates.
I have a website, and all the senior move stuff is on the website.
And I know you're very active in LinkedIn, so people should look for you there if they're looking for social media and stuff like that. Thanks, Mary. It's been a great pleasure, and thank you for all your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group that is called Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you will find me on social media. My handle is Gavin J. Gallagher. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the various projects I'm working on over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. And while you're there, please do add your name to the Join My Tribe thing over on the right-hand side. This will ensure you're kept up to date via my weekly newsletter. All of these links are in the show notes below. That's all for now. I will see you guys in the next episode.